Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening and welcome to Economia 2022, the collaboration between the Center for Economic Studies of University of Sri Jayewardenepura, Sri Lanka and Economic Studies Center of University of Dhaka coming together to brainstorm the future of economies in South Asia and also the whole world as a friendly debate of undergraduates of both the universities. Ladies and gentlemen, get ready to take your spirits up and cheer yourselves to enjoy and experience Economia 2022. So now, to mark the beginning of the ceremony, I invite you all to rise for the national anthems of Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. Ladies and gentlemen, to this grand occasion where there are two great nations getting together, I now welcome you all to Economia 2022. And it is a great step that we took forward as a Center for Economic Studies of University of Sri Jayewardenepura and the Economic Studies Unit of University of Dhaka to come to one stage to brainstorm our ideas on developing our nations as undergraduates. So I warmly welcome the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences of University of Sri Jayewardenepura, Senior Professor 𝐏𝐫𝐚𝐯𝐞𝐬𝐫𝐚, Director at CES, Professor B.W.R. Damayanti from the Department of Economics of University of Sri Jayewardenepura, Professor Dr. Sayama Hudridisha from the Department of Economics of University of Dhaka, Senior Lecturer and the Assistant Treasurer of CES, Mr. Anuradha Jayasinghe, and the Assistant Professor, Dr. Mohammed Islam from the Department of Economics of University of Dhaka. So ladies and gentlemen, the time has now arrived to start the friendly debate between Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, who represents the future of the world, the youth, ready to talk, whether the arbitrary printing of money in South Asian countries is or is not the major reason for the high inflation. So let me introduce the speakers tonight. The proposing team from the University of Sri Jayewardenepura, Sri Lanka. Shamal Ratnayaka, an undergraduate from the Department of Business Administration. Amasha Sirimanna, an undergraduate from the Department of Economics. Supun Muthukuda, an undergraduate from the Department of Accounting. And Krishan Dahammearachi, an undergraduate from the Faculty of Medical Sciences. And now, let me introduce the opposing team from the University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. Mahjabeen Prema, an undergraduate from the Department of Economics, Sami Mohammed, an undergraduate from the Department of Economics, Azeen Ishraq from the Department of Economics, and Nazi Lonob from the Department of Economics. Dear debaters, in here, and every speaker will get 5 minutes to speak, and the written speaker will get 6 minutes at the end. When you have 1 minute left, this timer card will be displayed, and at the end, when your time is up, this final timer card will be shown to you, as you can see here. So I invite you all to pay your attention on the timer cards while delivering your speeches. At the end of the first speaker's speech, the next speaker can start his or her own speech, arguing whether the arbitrary printing of money is or is not the main reason for the high inflation in South Asian countries. So, ladies and gentlemen, are you ready? All right. So now I invite the first speaker of the proposing team to start the debate. The stage is now yours.
Praveen, before I start, can I know the timing card situation, please?
Sure. As you can see on the screen, in the first, this is a 5 minute speech. So for the first 4 minutes time, you have to speak, and after you will see this let the battle again card. And in the final minute, you'll be seeing the 1 minute more card. And once your time is up, you will see this time is up card, and it will remain until your speech is end.
Thank you.
You can start now.
Ladies and gentlemen, money printing is a mere taxation on someone, on the public. Money printing is not exactly a tax, I would say, but something that robs the people from their own money rather than their money, but their purchasing power. So with that, ladies and gentlemen from Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, it is my honor to speak as the proposing team and give out my opening statement on our topic, is money printing the major reason for high inflation in Southeast Asia? So if I talk about the South Asian context, South Asia has always been ridden by inflation, not exactly at these levels. However, we have always seen 10, 15 levels of inflation. And with that inflation, we've always seen an increase in the money supply. However, we are talking about arbitrary money printing. So what is arbitrary? Arbitrary is something that is done without a plan, something that is done with a person's opinion rather than having a plan or something that is planned out or with some sort of a system. So while arbitrary money printing has negative impacts on the country and as an economy, we will talk with all the country examples from not exactly from South Asia, but from the world as to how arbitrary money printing has done many negative impacts throughout the world, not exactly in Southeast Asia. And next, what we would like to show is how money printing has caused increase in consumption levels. So for example, in the last 5 years, Sri Lanka has doubled their money supply from around 60,000 trillion to around 1.2 trillion, 120 trillion. So in the last 5 years, money supply has actually increased. And in the last 5 years and in the last 2 years, Sri Lankan government has printed more than 1.7 trillion rupees. So with that, we see in last July, August, September, we've seen drastic increases in money supply. However, we have seen inflation pick up from around 30% to 60, 64, 70, 75%. So we see the connection between money supply and an inflation. So that really conveys how money printing has grown and devastated the rate and in inflation. However, what we would like to point out here is that money printing is necessary. However, arbitrary money printing is what really digs the hole that Sri Lanka is in, as well as other South Asian countries such as Pakistan, as well as Bangladesh, India, etc. So if I just cite some examples who had gone from worst to worst, one example would be Zimbabwe. Another example would be Venezuela. Both countries had arbitrary money printing with dictator-type leaderships and corruptive governments. They saw their currencies degrade from a level to that we have never seen ever. Zimbabwe currency had devalued to around 1,000,000% a month. Inflation levels at monthly levels were at 1,000,000%, 1.5 million%. And this was all because of arbitrary money printing. So all in all, what I would like to focus on, and our team would like to focus on is how an economy in an economic crisis has suffered. However, this economic crisis would have been much better if a government would have really thought and really planned out their money printing plans and executed at a level that everyone benefits from it rather than goes into a hole like us.
Thank you very much. So the other team member can start your speech.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Sami Muhammad. I'm an undergraduate student from the Department of Economics from Dhaka University. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Let us approach this debate with a clear goal as to which side has to prove what, right? There is no contesting that arbitrary money printing is bad for the economy. That is not a reasonable burden to put on us to disprove. I think the debate happens in the context of whether or not it is the major cause for South Asian inflation in the first place. From our side, we shall prove to you that there are a multitude of other factors that contribute to inflation such that arbitrary money printing is not the major reason for inflation in this context, right? We tell you the moment government side comes up and tells us that arbitrary money printing is inflation is all because of arbitrary money printing, they erase a lot of economic nuance from the context, from the crisis. And thus, when our analysis becomes so shallow, our solutions becomes equally shallow. Therefore, we must approach this in a nuanced and in a broad manner that significantly deals with all of the problems that we face today. What we tell you from side opposition, we tell you that the problem, the economic crisis going on in Sri Lanka is specifically because of a combination of external economic shocks and policy missteps. Arbitrary money printing is only one of such policy missteps and not the only or the major one, right? There are a multitude of policy missteps that occurred in the Sri Lankan government leading up to this. There was major policy missteps from 2019 up to this point, which included fiscal policy, trade policy, and debt management, right? We know that in 2019, Sri Lankan government passed a lot of laws that enabled tax cuts, which reduced the Sri Lankan budget by almost 1.6 billion rupees, right? We know that there is a huge amount of debt financing going on in Sri Lanka up to that point, before arbitrary money printing became a solution. So our framing is that there were significant amount of root causes behind the decision of Sri Lankan government to arbitrarily print money, right? That is not the initiation of the crisis itself. There are a lot of root causes behind them, and we are going to analyze them for you. We are also going to be talking about Pakistan and Bangladesh, though their economic crisis situation has not escalated as much. And we're going to tell you in those cases as well, how money printing is not that much of a contributor compared to other factors, right? We tell you what happened in Sri Lanka. First of all, the main economic philosophy in Sri Lanka has been largely of state-owned entities, right? We tell you that most of the state-owned entities were financed through external debt, foreign debt and domestic debt, and these provided very low returns. 1 in 10 state-owned entities were turning in a loss and were requiring government revenue, tax revenue, in order to fund themselves, right? We tell you, when the government runs a deficit for that long, then it becomes inevitable that you fund those financing decisions through money printing, because this paired with another policy misstep, which was tax cuts, right? So when you do not have a balanced budget, when you are very focused on government spending, and yet you do not raise enough tax revenue, it logically follows that investors are not going to, like creditors who are not going to lend you money in the first place. Creditors lose confidence in your country, and they're less likely to invest in your country. And thus we see that a lot of the credit rating of Sri Lanka has gone down because of it failing to manage its debt obligations, right? We tell you, on the whole, what are we going to prove to you? Well, we are going to prove to you that there has been a massive economic phenomenon all over the world in the form of two shocks, namely the Russo-Ukrainian war, which resulted in a massive supply shock as to fuel and food, and number two, a huge demand shock, which is obviously the COVID-19 pandemic, which stagnated demand and resulted in massive amounts of like tourism freeze in case of Sri Lanka, and a lot of like business freeze in Bangladesh and Pakistan as well, right? We tell you, money printing, the debate is whether money printing has a contribution large enough or not, and two, the timing of that money printing, whether it's a crutch for more systematic problems or not. That is where the debate happens. Extremely proud to pose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sami. So now again, the time is for the posing team.
Right. A very good evening, everyone, and I hope all of you are doing well and keeping safe. I am Amasha Sirimana, currently holding the position of the President of Center for Economic Studies at University of Sri Jayewardenepura. Of course, yes, as Sami very correctly said, arbitrary money printing is not the only reason to inflation, but it can be the main reason for high inflation. We will be talking about high inflation, which has happened as a result of arbitrary money printing. With that, let's deep dive into the topic, and I will be mainly focusing on the relationship between inflation and money printing, so that we can set the context to talk about how we can draw the line in between arbitrary money printing and as well as the purposeful or strategic money printing. So I found out this exciting and amazing quote from one of the most prominent American economists, who's Milton Friedman. So he has said that inflation is caused by too much money chasing after too few goods. So too much money and too few goods. So those are the main points that we are going to focus during the first half of my time. So as we know, as everyone knows, money supply increases. When the money supply increases faster than the output, of course, there will be an inflation situation. Now, I'll take an example to summarize this situation. Now, suppose that economy produces 1,000 units of output, right? And at the same time, the economy has the money supply, which is the number of notes and coins, which can be identified as $10,000, which means the average price of the output produced will be $10. So we have the money supply, which is $10,000, and also the units, the units of output, which is 1,000. So 10,000 divided by 1,000, we can have the exact number, which is $10, right? So in that situation, when the government starts printing an extra money, now suppose that they have printed extra 5,000 notes, which means that creates a total money supply of $15,000. But the output of the country or the economy stays the same, which is 1,000 units, as well as the money supply has been increased. So in that kind of a situation, people have more money and they are willing to spend those money to buy goods and services. But as I said before, the output of the country or the economy would be the same. So in that kind of a situation, people are not better off because the prices are high and the value of money has been decreased. For an example, the amount of goods that we could buy for $10 has been reduced as a result of the high price levels. So that will occur inflation. That's the general scenario, right? And also that will lead towards the currency devaluation as well, that we know, right? So here, money printing is one of the reasons, as our colleague said, for inflation. But here we're going to talk about the high inflation. So I'll take an example, as Shamal very correctly said, Zimbabwe. Of course, it's not a South Asian country, but the context is very similar. It is also an emerging country, as most of the South Asian countries, and also the corruption levels and all these stuffs are very common. So they started printing money arbitrarily, right? They didn't have a purpose. They just printed money to settle down the drawbacks or the social unrest. They just printed money. They didn't have a purpose. But if a country has a purpose, of course they can print money. They can definitely increase their money supply, but they should have to have a proper goal to be achieved in the coming years, right? Maybe that can be an economic growth achievement or whatever it is. They should have to have a purpose or a strategy to print their money in order to increase money supply, and at the end of the day, they can actually influence their inflation in a given optimum level. But there are some countries, like most of the South Asian countries, they are printing money without having a proper exact reason. They don't have a purpose. They arbitrarily print money. That's why most of the South Asian countries are suffering from high inflationary situation. So that's the basic understanding of the today's topic as per our team, and I hope that my other colleagues will add on to that. Thank you so much.
Well, the opposing team, now it's your time.
Good evening, everyone. I am Mohammad Hassan Ishraq from University of Dhaka. So proud to opposing this motion. So before I start opposing this motion, we have to understand that what actually inflation is, and what kind of inflation do we see in South Asia. So the inflation that we mostly see in South Asia is actually cost push inflation. And how does this cost push inflation work, and what is this cost push inflation? We have to understand that. Firstly, cost push inflation occurs when overall prices increase due to increase in the cost of wages and raw materials. So if we see that when the price of raw materials or the wages rises, the production cost of producing a good gets increased as well. So this actually causes inflation, and that inflation is what we call cost push inflation. So how this work is that higher cost causes decreased supply, and hence prices rise. As the prices rise, workers actually start demanding more wages, which again decreases the supply, and hence again the price in the market rises. So this is how, because of the decrease in supply, we started vicious cycle of inflation. So what I'm going to show you today, that how poor administration or failure in administration in South Asia started this cycle started this cycle. So firstly, we're going to show. Firstly, lack of diversity in the basket of export goods in South Asia. This is a common thing in all the South Asian countries, especially in the example that I'm going to give you now, in case of Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, we have seen that Sri Lanka was heavily independent on textile and tea and tourism. As a result, when Sri Lanka made the suicidal decision of banning the chemical fertilizers, the tea production plummeted almost by half by April 2021. Though they had later withdrawn the ban from chemical fertilizers, the harm was already done. And at the same time, because of this the ban on chemical fertilizer, all kind of food production had plummeted as well. So a country that was once self-sufficient in food production now had to import foods. Now had to rely on other countries to meet their food demand. So this actually caused their income from tea or other export of crops to decrease, and at the same time the increase, and it also increased the their export costs as they had to import more foods now from other countries. At the same time, in 2019, the Easter Sunday attacks had happened in Sri Lanka. So we saw that this actually caused the tourism to suffer a lot, and many tourists actually started fearing in visiting Sri Lanka. So their income from tourism sector was also had also decreased very significantly at that time. So here we see three things from this lack of diversity in their basket, which is of course a major burden of the government to increase the diversity. So their income on tourism sector was decreasing from the effects of the Easter Sunday attack. Then came COVID, which plummeted their income in this sector almost to zero. And we also saw that their income from food export had also plummeted swiftly as their food production halved because of the chemical fertilizers ban. On the other hand, their import cost had also raised at the same time because of the increased import cost. So all this resulted into a rise in the imported cost and fall in the export revenue. So here inflation actually happened in two ways. Firstly, in cost push inflation, because as the food production had decreased, we saw the lack of food production in that country, and that caused inflation. And again, their foreign currency had also depleted, so they had to they had to now spend more of their local currency to import goods. In other case of Bangladesh relied heavily on India to meet their demand for onions. As a result, when India stopped their onion export, Bangladesh actually suffered heavily, and the price of onion at that time almost increased 5 times. In case of Pakistan, we can see that they had actually very good production of sugar at a time. But when they started producing that sugar, the production of other crops actually had lessened. So their food security was sacrificed. And at that time, because of this food security or food supply was sacrificed, the cost push inflation happened in this country as well. So we see that because of this administrative failure to understand what we have to, how much diversified our economy has to be and our export or import basket has to be, we see that this cost push inflation has affected these countries. And what we're saying is that arbitrary printing money is obviously one of the reasons, but the major inflation, the major harm was done even before the Sri Lanka or other South Asian countries had started printing money, which obviously is not case in other countries like Bangladesh or India. So very proud to oppose. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Azim. So now again the opposing time.
Okay, thank you so much. Sri Lanka is one of the major countries that we are considering right now. But one of the major issues that I was thinking once the opposing team was speaking was whether Sri Lanka did not suffer all these mentioned aforesaid issues previously as well. If you consider Sri Lanka, even after 1977, the open economic policy, every time Sri Lanka had all these issues. Sri Lankan policy discriminations, policy disruptions, these import cost increases, and all the other aforesaid issues were prevailing in the economy of Sri Lanka even previously as well. And you know, Sri Lanka is a country which was suffered from a civil war for more than 30 years. Even if you consider just after the civil war, Sri Lanka had an inflation only about a single digit number. Up to 2012, only largest number of inflation recorded in Sri Lanka was just 8 to 10%. So even having all these issues, what you mentioned, diversified products and all the import restrictions, export weaknesses and all the cost increases, tax reform regulation issues, everything, Sri Lanka managed to continue with an inflation of a single digit number. But now only Sri Lanka is reaching for an inflation which is double digit per month, probably would be something more than the Gallopian inflation even. So this high inflation, which is the root cause of the topic, is not something that has been derived from the aforesaid issues, because those issues were already there. But we didn't see a double-digit or triple-digit inflation in Sri Lanka. If we can consider all those issues are the major concerns, major reasons for the inflation, actually we are lacking something in our consideration. So what had actually happened, what had actually driven Sri Lankan economy to reach to an inflation which is recorded in double digits is something we need to consider. As we already told, due to these ad hoc shocks happened to the supply side of Sri Lankan economy, we had to fill up the vacuum of public finance through new issues, new printing of money. You know, when there is a pandemic, when there is a dollar crisis, when there are, East attacks or whatever ad hoc situations, the expenditure of government is increasing. There will be several new elements of the expenditure will also come. And at the same time, the income, the revenue of government will decrease. In order to fill up this vacuum, we have to go for funding methodologies. We have to go for foreign loans, and there can be domestic loans as well. But when there are domestic loans from market sources, there will be a crowding out effect. So considering each and everything, Sri Lanka had printed new money more and more and more and issued to the economy. So that is what ultimately caused for a huge inflation. The reason is, as we always discuss, there is an inflation that we can consider as a purposeful, strategic, planned printing of money, and also there can be printing of money which is just a mere arbitrary printing of money. Sri Lanka and almost all the South Asian economic countries are following enhanced money-targeted monetary policy, which is a middle way to reach to the inflationary targeted monetary policy. In this policy, we have to first declare what should be the future inflation rate for the particular country and do all the policy reformulations considering that particular rate, and we have to adhere to the rate. But what will have happened this year in this situation is we have no such kind of a prior said declared inflationary rate, and whatever the policy issue has been recovered through printing of new money. But that is not a sustainable solution for those kind of issues. That is why Sri Lanka had finally ended up with such kind of a high inflation. It is not just inflation, high inflation. And also, not only Sri Lanka, if you consider Maldives, now IMF has warned Maldives that don't print high amount of arbitrary money, because this would end up with a situation where Sri Lanka is currently suffering. So from everything of this, we can say that arbitrary money printing is the major reason for high inflation. Thank you.
Thank you, Supun. So now the opposing team, it's your chance.
Thank you so much, Honorable Moderator, for passing me the floor. It's been a pleasure to represent ESC as well as GU against its prominent side. Hoping that I am audible. I'm opposing the motion that arbitrary printing of money is the major reason for the high inflation in South Asia. As we are opposing, for better understanding, I would like to post my speech. Then I will give approximately comparative analysis, some input analysis as well. I will show you why we can buy their arguments, why our articulations are much more relevant, and last I will conclude my speech with better arguments, I guess. First of all, they raise a question like why single digit inflation. The question answers in two layers. The first layer is systematic issue takes time to boil over, reach a critical condition, I guess. And the second one is that macro policy implements at a lag as crisis hits instantly. As example, you can say that they had in Sri Lanka, they had sovereign like 190% GDP. And let's focus on impact analysis, like why fiscal mismanagement was the issue. Then they say that they say that's a major issue, but I would like to say that it's one of the reasons, but it's not the major reason, because fiscal mismanagement in Bangladesh is so that the inflation in Bangladesh is unfortunately largely due to an aggregate supply shock. So what is supply shock? Our previous speaker explained the spike in consumer goods prices like soybean oil during April-May period was due to their imports becoming more expensive due to the primary supplies limiting their exports. The supply of grains in Bangladesh largely came from Russia and Ukraine, which was disrupted due to Russian-Ukraine war, aside from the import of soybean largely depended on Argentina, which implemented a food trade due to internal shortage driven by shortage. On March 13, Argentina restricted exports of soybean oil and soybean meal as well. And later, because of March 31, permitting exports but raising export taxes on the products from 31% to 32%. This resulted in Bangladesh having to import grain and soybean from other countries at a higher price. This resulted in an increase in the price of the food domestically. And the Russian-Ukraine war has made the global fuel market extremely volatile. That the fuel price globally increased substantially since the leveling of Russian fuel supply for strategic purposes. This supply shock has affected nearly every country in the world in terms of fuel price and subsequently general price as well. Bangladesh has been largely insulated from the direct impact of global fuel prices shock due to the large amount of government subsidy in the fuel sector. Since then, there has been a balance of payment crisis in Bangladesh that the currency message is due to shrinking the foreign currency reserve. This had the effect of limiting imports temporarily, which limited supply of goods, and it required a large amount of external debt to cover the current accounts from World Bank and IMF. But if from this financial institutions were largely commissioned on decreasing in the form of subsidies, thus there has been 1.7% increase in fuel prices or export support. And lastly, why unproductive projects like high import costs are bigger issues than printing money? Like as a South Asian country, you can say that like political influence in these countries are massive and bearable. Like most of the development in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka quite diverse development. In addition, I like to add that immediate tax really affects the economy. Example, you can say that in 2019, Dhaka fiscal mismanagement, why it's so important? I would like to say that why domestic food insecurity, like Bangladesh is dependent on India, largely dependent on India, because most of the commodities imported most of the commodities from India. I must say, this leads to cost in economy because of sudden drop in supply chain. We have seen that in 2019, how soybean oil price. The last impact analysis, the Russian and Ukraine was I would like to say that the cost of inflation can be the major reason of this particular motion, not so proudly
Thank you very much, Arnab. So now, the proposing team, it's your chance.
Very good evening, everyone, to the panel, my fellow debaters, and the audience as well. My name is Krishan. I'm a final year medical undergraduate from our university. Let me start off by saying that the opening speaker clearly stated that their burden of proof does not include them defending arbitrary money printing. Sure, that is not what is expected of you, but I think it's fair for you for it to be requested that you prove why arbitrary money printing is not the major reason. We are clearly stating that in the context of the present climate, in the present economic crisis that we are facing, not just Sri Lanka, the entire South Asian region as a whole, arbitrary money printing is the sole reason. It's not as if we are saying that arbitrary money printing is the only reason. For us to propose that arbitrary money printing is a major reason, we inherently accept that there are minor reasons. That's the entire point of major. That if there were no minor reasons, the word major would be meaningless. Therefore, we are not saying that arbitrary money printing is the only reason, but all current statistics and bank reports reflect that the current economic crisis in Sri Lanka in particular, where inflation rose drastically, which affected every single life from the baby being born right at this minute to the person dying in the next, that arbitrary money printing is the sole miscommunication between the politicians and the economists that has led to this problem. So let me move on to my rebuttals with that introductory statement. As I said, the first speaker said that our approach should not be shallow. I accept, but you fail to recognize the elephant in the room. Team opposition throughout the debate stated that they believe that there are a myriad of reasons for the high inflation. Yes, everyone here as erudite undergraduates and professionals understand that inflation cannot be limited in scope to a single issue. But the motion that we have today up for debate is to see whether arbitrary money printing is the reason that has contributed the most to money printing, which according to the modern monetary theory and the theory of inflation itself, my previous speakers have already proved to you. As I said, you fail to identify the elephant in the room, and the problem is systemic. But as my third speaker clearly stated, this is nothing new to both Sri Lanka and to the countries of the region and to the world itself. Corruption, global supply chain issues, the Russia-Ukraine war, these are not issues that are unique to a certain country. These are issues that affect the whole world, but in one tiny corner of the South Asian region, we see inflation exploding. What, ladies and gentlemen, is the discerning factor? What is the sole reason where it has led to high inflation, which is in contrast to other regions and to other nations, as we have already proved, it's arbitrary money printing. Inflation is nothing new. Money printing is nothing new. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, money printing is a very potent tool. We can take an example from an Asian country itself with the example of South Korea, where they used money printing, but at the same time, they improved their production, which led to them not having inflation, but to them improving their economy to a state that we are all envious at the moment. The second speaker stated that there is a lack of diversity in the export in particular of the South Asian region. Again, ladies and gentlemen, this is nothing new to the region. This is something that we must speak of under another motion. This is a completely different topic. I mean, it obviously, as we have accepted, it may result in inflation, but do not be misunderstood. Do not be cajoled into believing that inflation itself is a bad thing. A creeping inflation is something that is beneficial to an economy. But the sole miscommunicating reason, the sole choice of arbitrary money printing has led to an exploding rate of inflation, especially in the region, especially in Sri Lanka. If you, as the second speaker failed to mention that if there is a problem and there is a solution, now, ladies and gentlemen, the solution itself has exacerbated the problem. If in that context, do we still want to believe that there are a myriad of other reasons that has caused inflation and we fail to address the elephant in the room? If this occurs, ladies and gentlemen, the only thing that happens is that we fail to address the elephant in the room. We make the same mistake over and over again, and we cause economic hardship and economic disaster again and again in the same region, in the same nation. And that is not something that we should strive for. The second speaker gave a very informative brief from his manuscript about the issue of lack of diversity in exports, but he failed to explain why it has led to the high inflation affecting the region now, as I said, as my first speaker said, during the months of June to August this year. The third speaker, ladies and gentlemen, repeated that the macro policy of Sri Lanka is faulty. Of the region, the macro policies followed in the region is faulty. We accept, again, nothing new. He also repeated the Russia-Ukraine crisis and the global chain crisis. Again, nothing new. They failed to mention that this is something that has directly led to the crisis that we are facing now. Especially one example that I would want to bring out is the COVID grant of Lankan rupees 5,000 that was granted to all citizens of Sri Lanka. Those are the kind of things that required money printing to happen in the first place, that resulted in high inflation. These are short-term solutions to long-term problems. Again, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, what I would want to say is this situation must be used as a learning curve. We should not limit ourselves to a debate and say that this is not the reason, this is the major reason, these are the minor reasons. That is not where we should stop. We should learn why it went wrong, and we should make sure that we don't make the same mistake again. And that starts by identifying the problem, and identifying the problem means that we identify that the elephant in the room is arbitrary money printing. Thank you for your time.
All right. So as we have now come to the end of the debate, I now invite the leader of the proposing team to come up with his reply.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the floor. Why have the people of Sri Lanka protested the Rajapaksa regime out of power? Why have they stormed the President's Palace and not the central bank? Thank you so much for giving me the floor once again. And I am 𝐏𝐫𝐚𝐯𝐿, a third-year student of University of Dhaka, and I'm going to oppose the debate today. Understand, they began their speech with quoting some theories, but quoting economic theories is not enough. From the first speaker of proposition, we got the analysis of how inflation works from money printing. But while analyzing economic phenomenon, one needs to keep the socio-political context in mind. In this case, the socio-political context of South Asia, which my first speaker from side opposition has done. He has talked about the Sri Lankan tax cuts, which have been completely ignored by side government, which is extremely disappointing. The lack of prudent management of government investment is also something we talked about. We talked about arbitrary loans that the Sri Lankan government and other governments of South Asia has taken from foreign powers. The COVID-19, the Russia-Ukraine war, something that has been impacting our inflation and consumer price index as well. Why does money printing plays the most crucial role in this inflation was the burden on side proposition, but that's something they failed to address in this debate. Understand that money printing causes inflation. We all know that, no doubt about it. But how does that relate to Sri Lanka and other South Asian countries? They talked about Zimbabwe. Understand that Zimbabwe is completely not related to the South Asian context. Why so? Because we have much more evolved economies, right? We have better accountabilities in terms of government. We do not have such a dictatorial powers in most South Asian economies, right? Understand that even the case of Zimbabwe essentially worked as a warning in the case of South Asia. They also completely missed the case of China, an extremely superpower in our neighborhood who is essentially waiting with chunks of loans to create influence in this region. How can we forget about the Hambantota port of Sri Lanka, where the Sri Lankan government took loans from the Chinese to build that port, but they couldn't pay back and they had to hand over that land to China, essentially not getting any revenues from that port. We know about CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. That too is not creating enough revenue because we have been investing, the South Asian nations have been investing in the mega projects that were essentially not as beneficial or not as revenue creating. So it's important to address these issues in order to address the money management, the lack of fiscal management that has been a very crucial issue to the inflation of these countries. My second speaker push inflation and supply side issues that have been affected Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and Pakistan. Those are issues that have been completely ignored by side proposition, and they have not engaged with us at all. That these issues had already existed. But understand that your people literally protested a government out of power. Why? Because the money printing? No. Because of the Rajapaksa regime's administrative failure, because of the tax cut, because of the essentially disastrous policies they took in terms of the export and import issues, right? Money printing is essentially a very small portion of the budget deficit that has been created in South Asia and other nations. It is extremely important to look how these South Asian economies have been dealing with the issues of fiscal deficits, right? It is important that these nations have been dependent on foreign loans. Pakistan is going for their 14th IMF bailout in 35 years. Bangladesh has also recently taken a loan from South Asia, from IMF. So it's extremely crucial how these South Asian nations have been dealing with this budget deficit essentially. My third speaker talked about fuel market and how that has been influencing the economies of South Asia, right? Understanding the international issues that is going on in this crisis period is extremely crucial.
Their third speaker came up and said that how we have not been addressing the issue in the world. But in their world, they stop the money printing. But does that stop inflation? Will stopping money printing simply stop the inflation in these South Asian countries? Bangladesh has not been arbitrarily printing money. So what has been the issue here? We have been unable to manage our markets, which have been extremely susceptible to market capture. A country of paddy and rivers is essentially facing increasingly high prices of food. Why? Because we are printing money? No, because our markets are being taken by cartels. Our rice mills, which have been some of the auto rice mills, around 200 auto rice mills owners, have been essentially building a cartel and increasing the rice prices. But edible oil prices are extremely high in our country. In the fuel market internationally, although the price has risen, in Bangladesh, that has been increasing, and that has created a ripple effect over the country. But why? Because some people have been using it for their benefit, using it purposefully to create artificial crisis in order to exploit their own economic benefits. It is extremely crucial to address the socio-political issues that are extremely classic in the South Asian countries. Giving the examples of land with very underdeveloped is not at all relevant here. We need to understand the international issues that have been working here. Side proposition in this debate has failed to answer several questions. How does the classic theory of seniorage relate to South Asia? That is to say, how does money printing affect South Asia? They have completely failed to address that. How regional politics contributed to the economic crisis? They have completely ignored the role of China, the role of foreign power, something we have completely ignored this issue. How response to crisis truly pain. This is not the solution here. We tell you that Sri Lanka, a beautiful land of wonderful people, is in shambles simply because the political Rajapaksa elite chose to do so. Pakistan, a land of couplets and poetry, is faulty decisions. Bangladesh, a land of rivers and paddy, is increasingly facing high CPI because of the market capture and the crony capitalism that exists here. Rejecting all this would simply be untrue and unjust to the people in this part of the world. We are telling you repeatedly that, of course, money printing is an issue, but understanding how money printing actually works is extremely crucial as well. The fiscal mismanagement that has happened here, the biggest example of which could be the Rajapaksa regime's recent tax cut, or the Pakistan's government's increasing spending on mega projects that are not as beneficial, right? These issues have been the core reasons of the inflation here. Understanding these are crucial. Only stopping money printing would not stop the inflation in this part of the world. That is precisely why the Sri Lankan people did not barge into the central bank. They barged into the presidential palace because even they know that it is the administrative issue which has been causing our wonderful people the problems. Extremely proud to oppose.
Leader of the proposing team, it's your time to conclude the debate.
Thank you very much, Praveen. So as the reply, I would like to say from the last speaker that the last speaker uttered that Bangladesh has not printed money arbitrarily. And I had just noted down that the inflation rate of Bangladesh is just 6.67. So that really tells a story as to how why Bangladesh's inflation rate is not high as such. If we take South Asian context, Sri Lanka has the highest inflation rate, which is around 70%. And why is that? Because out of South Asian context, Sri Lanka has printed the most money. Sri Lanka has printed arbitrarily many currency notes which have pumped into the economy. To be exact, it was 1.7 trillion. And throughout the debate, the opposing team talked about lack of diversity, macro policy, fertilizer bans, suppliers facing difficulties, domestic production needs to be increased. Yes, we understand everything that all that needs to be done. However, each and every country in the South Asian context actually went through this. Maldives went through this, India went through this, Bangladesh went through this, Pakistan went through this, Nepal went through this, Afghanistan went through this. But who is currently having the troublesome moment? That is Sri Lanka. Because we not only addressed these issues that that you told, we pumped excessive money into the market so that the consumers has many money to spend. Even though the country is at its end, even though people are protesting, there are people still going into restaurants. There are still people enjoying their lives, going into restaurants, going into vacations, because people have money in their hands, which they did not earn. The economy did not create this money. It was arbitrarily put in by the government excessively so that there will be the money in the people's hand will be there. In another theory that I would like to talk about is the South Asian context. South Asia's lot of countries have proved that modern monetary theory is a way to go. And that has really shown negative impacts on Sri Lanka as well as Pakistan. So if you see in the last couple of years, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka has followed this modern monetary theory, citing that what you opposing team told, that modern money printing
It seems that the proposing team leader is having a connection issue, so we'll give him a couple of minutes to rejoin.
Hi. Sorry, there was a small malfunction with my lap. Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are, Shravan. You can start from the
Thank you. So as I was saying, that the South Asian context, South Asian governments has really moved on to this modern monetary theory, and that, my friends, has had some sort of a negative impact, and that has really shown that in Pakistan it's at 35%, at Sri Lanka it's at 70%. And I would like to show that after the government change, and as the new central bank governor came in, the first thing that he did was to move away from the modern monetary theory. And as at now, we have slowly coming in to rationalized money printing, strategic money printing, and that we see in this month, the inflation for the first time has slowed down from 69% to 66%. So all these reasons that you told, the lack of diversity, macro policy, fertilizer ban, and the issues with the politics, issues with governance, everything that you told is still there. The war is still going on. The COVID problems are still going on. Supply chain issues are still there. But why is the inflation coming down? Why is it slowing down? This is because we have moved away from arbitrary money printing. We have stopped pumping money so much, and we have gone into a plan of actually pumping money with a strategic plan, pumping money enough so that the economy sustains and the social aspect sustains. And for example, and let me take another point that the speaker told, that Zimbabwe is out of context. If we see Zimbabwe's crisis, and again Venezuela's crisis, and the Lebanon crisis that we are having right now, they also had same issues. They had social issues. They had political ill governance. They have corruption. They have low income capacity. So all of this context in terms of Sri Lanka, it's quite similar, even though it is not geographically situated. And we know what happened to Zimbabwe. Even in Sri Lanka, the governance was not exactly what we want, and just like Zimbabwe. And if we don't want a dictatorship, we can look at Lebanon, which has a democratic kind of style. And in Lebanon, there was the weight of the money printed was around 9 tons, around 13 trillion Lebanese dollars. So with that, today the inflation standards Lebanon is 158% a month. So you see, even though all these issues that you tell, yes, it does create inflation. However, high inflation, hyperinflation, if you see in Lebanon, everything that we see is created by arbitrary money printing. Yes, for inflation does happen with everything, and there might be situations where we need to cope up with maybe 20 to 30% inflations. But the artificial demand that creates through excessive money printing or arbitrary money printing is the reason where the purchasing power of the people really depreciates from 70% to 80% to 90%. So all in all, throughout this debate, we discussed how printing money, excessive printing money actually devalues our currency and increases inflation. We talked about how arbitrary inflation is different from strategic or rationalized money printing. We discussed how an economy needs money printing, but excessive money printing really devalues the currency. We also talked about how other reasons of inflation, yes, it does come into inflation. However, the driver behind inflation from 20 or 15% to 100 to 150% is money printing. So with that point, I would like to conclude the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the proposing team. So with that, the proposition team has done their job, and now I invite the leader of the opposition to mark the conclusion of the debate.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, Sami, you are audible.
Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Let us look at this debate and examine what we hope to take away from this debate. What we hope to take away from this debate is solutions and insights as to how to deal with high inflation crisis in the future, right? So when you're thinking about this debate, about the both sides and about the motion, what I want you to think about is what changes when one side's conclusion is accepted. When we accept the government's conclusion that we need to plan and strategically plan out money printing and not do it arbitrarily, we believe that does not give us enough insight to combat inflation in the modern times. We tell you that simply focusing on strategic money printing and limiting money printing is too narrow a scope in order to combat inflation in itself. We tell you in South Asia as a region, we need to diversify our economic policy and fight on multiple fronts from multiple aspects of the economy. We cannot simply focus on the monetary aspect and simply hope that we will not turn out like Zimbabwe, right? We tell you that that is an aspect in and of itself, that money printing is an aspect of inflation. But we tell you it is not the major one, it is not an only one, simply because of the fact that we have told you of the systematic issues that were present in the crisis-affected economies that we have, right? What happens under our world? In our world, when you believe that arbitrary money printing is not the major problem behind today's high inflation, then what you do is you look at the problems that we have cited, the problems of having too much import dependency, having an undiversified import basket, having budget, balance of payment deficits, current account deficits, having systematic budget deficits and poor debt management, and having state-owned enterprises spending too much, and exposure of the economy to external supply shocks. Understand that these are all lessons that people are taking all over the world. Value chain assessment and exposure to external supply shocks is something that all of the developed countries are doing as well all over the world. We tell you that these are the problems that we need to think about in the 21st century while combating inflation. And that is the more constructive side. That is the conclusion that gives us more insight. What have it like? So in terms of solutions, we need to think about which side gives you a more nuanced approach to combating inflation itself. Right now, let us have a recap of what each side said and how that comes into aspect. Right, side government largely focused on the aspect of how arbitrary money printing accelerated inflation to a certain extent and put it into hyperdrive. Right. They also said that another significant argument was if money printing was, all of these other issues were a problem, then why didn't we see any problems in regards to inflation like before the money printing went on, right? To both of these answers, we have engaged with this in the terms of, firstly, we tell you that for the second point, that why wasn't there any inflation in the previous eras, we tell you that there can be systematic flaws in a certain economic policies of a region, and those systematic flaws, when they come under stress, the system cracks. And this is the crack that we are seeing, and it is a huge coincidence of multiple crises that created this unique situation, that administrative failure, external supply shocks, it created a perfect storm for the economy of Sri Lanka. That is our nuanced take as to how to deal with inflation, right? We tell you that macroeconomic policy often takes a large amount of lag in order for it to take place, or for it to affect the economy, right? There's a amount of time lag because things do not happen instantaneously in policy making, right? We tell you that the problems of tax cuts, the problems of huge amount of deficit spending, of like budget deficits, huge amount of current account deficits, were already problematic within the Sri Lankan economy, and deficit spending is already a problem within Bangladesh and Pakistan. We tell you that this was exposed significantly when we saw the world go through an unprecedented pandemic, and it exposed those systematic flaws. So we must work together to repair those systematic flaws and give us better administrative responses in regards to crisis management, where we are coordinated and we do not do unplanned things. In our case, we do more fiscal management. We do more encouragement of business. We do more trade deals, which diversifies our exports. On their side, all the solution that they're suggesting is the central bank becomes a bit saner and does some planning when it comes to seigniorage or money printing, right? We tell you that is absolutely inadequate in this modern times where you need a multitude of economic tools that are ready at our hands in order to combat the problems of the 21st century. And that's why we believe we win this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sami Mohammed. So with that, we are ready to mark the end of the friendly debate, arguing the motion whether the arbitrary printing of money is or is not the major reason for the high inflation in South Asian countries. So now we are ready to move on to our panel of academics who are ready to give their valuable comments on our powerful debaters. So for that, I invite Professor Dr. Jayewardenepura to address the gathering. Ma'am, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, it's really great to see the students of economics talking about such a timely and topical issue. So I really enjoyed the debate. Unfortunately, I have to leave first. So that's why it would be good that if I can speak for 2 minutes. So first of all, I think there are few issues that we need to understand. The discussion and the topic was, rather than of a single country, it would be better if you could have talked about the overall scenario. So often it seems that we are focusing too much on Sri Lanka. So that is something that I was thinking, that obviously Sri Lanka is important, but at the same time, it's good if you could talk about South Asia as a whole. Secondly, it's important to see that we know that inflation, when we talk about inflation is cited as a monetary phenomena, but we know that there are also fiscal aspects as well. So it is important to distinguish between these two aspects, and it is important when we are talking about both the monetary and the fiscal phenomena to distinguish about what is the imported inflation and what is the inflation which is the explained part and which is the unexplained part. Because in countries like Bangladesh, there are some aspects of inflation which we often say that it's a black box or an unexplained part. So it's important to link those things to how or whether these are related to money supply, or whether these are related to money printing. So that was my second point. And my third point was like, when we are talking about any macro aspect, it is important that we identify the channels. That is extremely important. So it is important when we are talking about inflation, we must identify the channels, and we must identify the channels which is a general thing rather than focusing on one country. My fourth point is like some of the speakers have done this, but it is important in a debate that you try to nullify or negate the opponent's logic rather than providing only your own logic. So I have seen that in some cases that was a bit absent. And in terms of the debate, there is also another thing. It seems that often we have become a little bit out of focus in certain cases, because it is not about to discuss about why Sri Lanka is in a crisis. It's about to discuss about whether arbitrary money printing is a prime cause for inflation. So that is often, I found that students were very excited to explain and talk about and to debate on this issue. So that is very important, to be focused. So to be focused, to identify the channels, to identify what we can explain, what we cannot explain. And finally, we have to see that whether arbitrary money printing or whether money printing or whether they explain inflation or what is a high inflation. So we need to identify and we need to distinguish these concepts as well. Like obviously, when we are talking about arbitrary money printing, that's not good for the economy. But whether that is the real cause, that is what we are actually debating about. So these are some of the issues. I think it's important if we want to debate on this aspect. But actually, it was very interesting to see that the way students were debating and trying to nullify and trying to have their own view. But it's more important to have it in a more focused and in a bullet point form, rather than to go to some other aspects and to discuss about some other issues which might be very relevant, but which might not be very relevant for this particular debate. So I just want to finally conclude that it's a very interesting topic, and I think there's a lot of scope to talk about it. For it's not 5 minutes is not at all enough. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and all the best to both of the teams. Thank you.
Thank you very much, madam, for your valuable thoughts, and I'm sure that it has meant a lot to our students. All right, so now I would like to invite Professor B.W.R. Damayanti from representing the University of Sri Jayewardenepura to give her comments. Since Professor Damayanti is facing a power issue, it seems, I now invite a lecturer of the Department of Economics of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences and Economic Research Analyst, Mr. Pasan Vijayawardene.
Okay, thank you, Praveen. So very interesting debate. So actually the Professor Damayanti was there in the session, but I think because of a certain power issue, she left, but I was trying to contact herself, but there is a signal issue. Sorry for that one. Okay, so thank you for the invitation, Praveen. It was a fantastic debate. The most important thing I want to highlight is both the teams have explored a lot, especially the Bangladesh team. Okay, they have explored the crises in Sri Lanka a lot. Okay, so actually the Sri Lankan crisis is something very familiar for us. But if other people are talking those facts to the point in an accurate way, then that is the happiness of the students' exploration level. So I respect all the supervisors who supported this Bengali team, the Bangladesh team. Good job regarding the exploration of the facts and figures. As well as that, I want to say the both of the teams have talked about the Keynesian theory, the modern monetary policy, modern monetary theory, so MMT theory. So all these theories came to the debate. So the economics was available in the debate. So I'm so happy because in most of the debates, when we are talking about economics, the economics aspects will be missing. But in this debate, such a thing was not happen. Both the teams were managed to protect the economics aspect within or throughout the whole debate. And however, one of the, as the previous madam said, okay, I totally agree with herself. Okay, some of the people, or at the latter part of the debate, I saw that the students are messing up the context of the debate. Actually, even in the research topic, there is a content and context. I think understanding the content and context is so much important when it comes to research as well. So in this research, the context is South Asia. South Asia mean. So I was waited to see some of the examples from Afghanistan. I was waited to see some of the stories from Maldives. Okay, but most of those countries were ignored, and the entire debate was limited mostly to 3 countries, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. In that one, the Sri Lanka was the major one. So at the latter part, I saw that South Asia seems to be Sri Lanka. Okay, however, the teams need to focus on that one as well. However, the other one is in some parts people moved out from the topic, as a previous madam said clearly, right? So here we are here to talk about whether the arbitrary money printing is the major reason or not the major reason. I'm so happy about the Bangladesh start. Okay, so very clearly Bangladesh leader started the debate and he said, here we have to talk about the reason. Okay, he understood what is the main turning point of the topic, and added an value addition or added an extraordinary emphasis on the word the, right? It's good. But the thing is, at the middle or at the latter part, whether this is proved is the problem that I was gone through. Okay, and as well as that, when a proposing team is proving it, coming up with some of the fair reasons, stories from the South Asian context should be there, then moving to Zimbabwe, then moving to the other countries. If we can talk more on the South Asian region, that will be more great. So that's something that I wanted to say. And I want to finally add one thing, one idea actually. It's not directly relevant for the debates, right? But most of the people talk about this Sri Lankan situation. As a Sri Lankan economics analyst, I want to add one comment. What happened in Sri Lanka is, so Sri Lanka didn't have this kind of a crisis earlier, right? This was the very first experience that we are undergoing with this kind of a deep crisis. Since our policymakers didn't have this kind of experience, we pumped money for the short-term purposes. For an example, okay, during the lockdown period, people lost jobs. So we granted a certain amount of cash grant, then again lockdown. Okay, so we didn't expect the second wave. Sometimes we didn't expect the third wave. Because of this uncertainty, again and again, we printed money. Okay, so at that time, there was no option. Okay, if we not go for the printing money, that will be creating definitely a social unrest. To control the social unrest, Sri Lanka has printed money for the short-term purposes. But the thing was, okay, later, after a certain time period, years, the policymakers also understood that that was the arbitrary money printing. Okay, that was not just money printing, that was the arbitrary money printing. Actually, the money printing, we can't say money printing is good or bad, right? But arbitrary money printing, sometimes it might create some different kinds of distortions in the economy. So that's something happened in the Sri Lankan context. So that is something extra value addition for the debate, because people have talked about the Sri Lanka. Okay. However, I'm so happy about all the speakers came from the Bangladesh and all the speakers came from Sri Lanka. They did a fair duty within the topic what they was speaking. So thank you very much, and kudos to all the people who guided these teams. Thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pasanu Jayewardenepura. So now I invite the Assistant Professor, Dr. Mohammed Deen Islam, to give your valuable ideas. Sir, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. You're audible.
Thank you so much, organizers, for inviting me to such an interesting and exciting event. So, if you ask to any individual who doesn't have any economic background, that what single economic concept affect their life and which economic term they're familiar with, perhaps the answer would be inflation. So this is such an interesting and important topic, and I would like to congratulate both teams, the favor and against team. They did a phenomenal job, because this issue is extremely difficult, and perhaps you are aware that much of the macroeconomic school of thought, classical, Keynesian, new classical, new Keynesian, all of the debates actually revolve around this issue. That what is the relationship between money, supply, and output? So let me define. Actually, printing money is a small part of money supply. What matters is money supply. So we have to be aware of that. It's money supply, not printing money. Printing money is a small part of money supply. So money supply can increase inflation, or could be the main source of inflation. So what are the empirical, since I already told you that much of the macroeconomic research have done on this issue, we know the Phillips curve and short-run and long-run debate. So what are the empirical evidence on this issue? So there are two things that is clear from empirical research. The first one is, over a long period of time, there is a one-to-one relationship between money supply and price level. But in the short run, if you increase money supply or decrease interest rate, nominal interest rate, then the demand go up and output goes up. So that means that in the short run, increasing money supply may not lead to that much inflation. So now let me focus on whether the printing money supply or increasing money supply is the cause or the response. I guess team leader from the opposing team raised this issue that increasing money supply might be the cause of some crisis. So if you think about, when does a government or an economy go for printing money? So when government done budget deficit and fails to borrow money from internal or external sources, then as a last resort, instead of adopting austerity policy, government can print money and finance expenditure. But at the same time, what happens that the confidence on the government loses confidence from both internal economic agents and external economic agents. So even if government conduct a single time printing or increasing money supply, then it changes the expectation And even if government doesn't print any more money or doesn't increase money supply, the expectation only can lead to spiraling out of inflation. Because as you know that if people expect more inflation in future, they will adjust their prices, they will adjust their current prices, that will lead to more inflation. And this inflation will go out of hand. So, and then if government cannot borrow money from internal or external sources, then government has to print more money. So printing money might be some response to a crisis, and it might cause one pure increase in price level, but expectation of people, of producer and consumer, actually accelerate the increase in price. So I would say that both teams had done excellent job. These are really difficult issues. The field is still not settled. I really appreciate they took time to identify some of the causes that what actually lead to those crises when government prints money. It's not, and I was actually expecting that some of the terms would be defined properly. So, for example, what does it mean by arbitrary? When we say arbitrary, I mean every government has some plan. Even central bank, who in response of changing money supply, they have some plan. So, debating to what extent we'll call arbitrary printing money, and also defining some term like money supply and relationship between printing money supply. What are the channels of increasing money supply, monetary stock? So if we define those things, I think that it would be much easier for me to follow the debate. But I would like to congratulate both teams. They have done an excellent job. Congratulations. And I hope you'll keep this spirit up. And thank you again for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your valuable thoughts. So, ladies and gentlemen, that marks the end of an amazing discussion that we had on whether the arbitrary printing of money is the major reason or not for high inflation in South Asian countries. So to end this with a happy note, I invite the General Secretary of Economic Studies Unit of the University of Dhaka, Ms. Suravita Bazak, to deliver the vote of thanks. It's over to you.
Hi, this is Chaudhry Nabila Tasneem. I am the president of ESC. I'll be taking over instead of Chaudhry. Very good evening to everyone who's watching. First and foremost, I'd like to congratulate CES for taking the extraordinary step and collaborating with ESC. This is the first event on which we have partnered formally, and I eagerly anticipate future cooperative initiatives for both clubs. And I would like to thank the debaters from the both teams, without whom the discussion would not have been possible. Hearing them talk passionately on both sides of the subject was extremely captivating. And a special thanks to all our distinguished faculty members who made the time to join us from both the countries, who participated in the discussion board and provided us with a very insightful feedback on the debate and on the topic in general. And I want to extend my gratitude towards my ESC colleagues who were instrumental in making this partnership possible. Finally, I would like to end this by thanking everyone who watched the debate with us and contributed to the conversation in the comments section. We eagerly look forward to such future collaborations. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you very much, Nabila. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to mark the end of a wonderful journey filled with new experiences and moments to think about the economies in both the countries and at the same time in the global context as well. So with that, let me conclude the session. So until we meet again with another wonderful, interesting, fruitful session like this, have the best time ahead. Signing off as your host, Praveen Wickramasinghe. Good night.